welcome to another Revinova product release webinar. My name is Dave Romanchuk and I'm the Director of Product here at Revinova. And today we'll be focusing in on the latest Revinova product release, version 7.12. Now, as we've done in webinars past, I'll be joined by several of the Revinova product team members who will be demoing some of the highlighted features of this release. Now, some of you may have noticed that we did send 2 separate webinar invites out, and the webinar that you've attended here today will focus primarily on the 3PL and brokerage related enhancements to this 7.12 release. But since the 7.12 release was so large and we have so many exciting features, we decided to split it into 2, and the second invite for the second webinar, which is at a later date, will actually focus on one of our newer initiatives that we're very excited about, which is our brand new Revinova Fleet Operations module. So if you have any interest in that, I highly encourage you to attend that webinar at a later date. With all that said, first we're going to start with a quick and hopefully painless slide deck where I'll run through a quick summary overview of what you can expect to see in the demo here today, and then we'll hand it over to the demos where you can see some more of the details. So first thing, just a quick reminder, again, this is hopefully familiar to most of you, but if you do, or if your coworkers do, in fact, miss this webinar session for today, we are recording it, so you will be able to see the recorded webinar, which is posted on the Revinova Learning Center. In addition, throughout the webinar, I'm sure there will be questions that come up, so if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature that is available in the RingCentral app. Let's dive into the release overview. There are basically 2 sections of functionality that we're going to be reviewing here today, and those 2 I've segmented by identifying new features and then enhancements. The new features that we'll be demoing for you today are, first, the Load Document LWC, second, the Inbound EDI 210 matching, third, support for multiple accepted carrier and vendor quotes on a load, and as I mentioned, I just wanted to put the shameless plug out there for the Fleet Operations module, the separate webinar that we have scheduled at a later date, so definitely attend that if you can. And then as far as the enhancements go, you'll be hearing from our product managers to talk about support for round-trip loads, as well as enhancements to the remove carrier, email, document, and process enhancements. This next slide shows some of the other enhancements and new features that we'll be walking through here briefly, but we won't be demoing. But should you have further questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. So with all of that said, why don't we jump into the demos. First one I'll be taking myself, which is the new Load Document LWC. In previous versions of Revinova, if you needed to generate a document, you would come to the load in question and come to your Documents tab, and within the sub-tab of the Documents tab, depending on which document you were looking to generate, you would go to that corresponding tab. And what we've done is we've actually transitioned off of this Documents tab and sub-tab architecture and onto the new Lightning Web Component architecture with this new Documents button. So what I'll show you here is the flexibility and power that we've baked into a single button on the page here. So when I click the button, the document button here, it's going to launch a modal, and the modal will show a lot of the functionality that used to live in those sub-document tabs, all consolidated into a single point that's much faster to respond to clicks and points and edits. The very first thing on the Documents modal that you'll see here is the document selection that you're going to generate. So when I hit the drop down here, the very first thing that you'll see is the list of documents that are available to generate. And one of the things that I'll point out here is the bill of lading. That was one of the documents that we've had several customers request the ability to create BOLs prior to a carrier being assigned to a load. And so with this enhancement, we actually baked that functionality in. So you can now generate BOLs pre-carrier assignment. The next item that I'll point out on this document LWC is the overrides dropdown. So again, similar to how you've had the ability to generate blind or double blind BOLs in the previous document generation tool, you now have that ability to do that here as well. So in the drop-downs, we have our selected field of ship from name. I've added a test from name as my value. And if I hit the save and preview button, just below the override section is our preview, where you'll be able to see on my screen here, I've done the override of the name, and as you can tell, the test from name has been placed there. In addition to the overrides, you also have the ability to change the document name. So if you're trying to rename it and hide, either obfuscate the carrier's name or customer's name, whatever it might be, you can do that here as well. There's, of course, the Save button, which will save the document to the load, or Save and Close, which closes the modal entirely. If I minimize the preview screen, the next section on this widget is the Documents screen. And so what you'll notice here is we have several documents that have been attached to not only the load, but also the related objects to that load. So what we have is several load documents. I've already generated several BOLs and carrier rate and load confirmations. But what you also see here is the parent record of the customer quote and the customer quote document that's attached to that record. So this document LWC not only shows the load records, but also the customer quote records. So again, kind of consolidating all the document functionality into a single widget for quick and easy access. The last section of this new Documents LWC is the email section. And so the intent with this is to offer a one-stop shop where you can quickly and effectively select particular email templates when you're trying to respond quickly or send a document to a carrier that's on the phone and they need something quickly. So if we select Load Tender with Assignment, that's the email template that you've seen before. And then the CC, and the BCC fields here are the same as what you've seen in the other email LWCs that we have, like the Tender LWC, wherein you can pick the particular source of the contact that you want to choose. So in this instance, let's say I wanted to resend a carrier a rate confirmation. I could come to this Load Document LWC, choose my email carrier 1, and then when I click into the recipient field, you'll notice that the contacts that are returned in the search results here are the contacts that are filtered for that particular carrier account. Likewise, you can also filter by role of the contact, and so that'll be your transportation role. And then lastly, you can of course search for all of the contacts in the system or the users in the system as well, if those are the folks that you're trying to contact. The final thing that I'll show on the email widget here, the email section of the Load Documents widget here, is at the very bottom you have this pick list that allows you to choose the source of the documents that you would like to attach to this particular email. So as I mentioned, we've consolidated a lot of the functionality that was in different locations and consolidated it here such that you can choose the particular record that you're looking to attach documents from, in this case the load. So I'll attach my BOL. And then let's say I also wanted to attach, I'm emailing my customer as an example. Let's say I also want to attach my customer rate confirmation. So I choose customer quote, which is the accepted customer quote on the load. On that customer quote, I have my rate confirmation saved, and so we'll add that as well. So with just a few simple clicks after launching our Documents widget, I was able to fashion an email template, attach the documents that were attached to different records in the system, and then send that out. So that's the Documents LWC, and with that, I'll transition it over to Alyssa for the EDI 210 matching.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to demo our new enhancement to inbound EDI 210 transactions, which was an enhancement that we released at the 710, which allowed for carriers to send invoices via the EDI integration that we enabled. What this feature does is when an unmatched invoice comes in, meaning we can't find a load or an invoice to match that EDI transaction to, we will create what we call an unmatched EDI transaction within the system, which will allow your accounting users or any users that are dealing with invoices on a regular basis to look at this LWC and quickly match those invoices to the existing loads and then avoid all the manual entry that they were previously having to do. Okay, let's take a look. All right, so I already created an inbound EDI transaction. So you can see that our carrier here, EDI carrier, sent a load for $900, and the system wasn't able to match this against any existing loads or invoices within the system. So when you click on this new LWC, it's going to automatically bring in any loads that have the same carrier as your EDI transaction and try and match based on the last 6 months. We also allowed for some filtering to further fine-tune this location or this matching for your users. So if you want to perhaps select a different carrier, or if you want to search by a specific customer, you are able to do so. You can select by only loads that have been previously delivered or loads that are in transit that you might have received an invoice for. And then you can fine tune that date range. Instead of just doing the 6 months, you can search for something in the last week. And then last but not least, if you know a specific invoice actually matches a specific load, you can go ahead and type in that load number here as well. Last but not least, once you've located your load that it needs to create the invoice for or that matches that XML transaction, you go ahead and just select it from the list of available loads, and you can hit Create New. What this will do is match the XML transaction to that load, and then behind the scenes create the invoice for your users. So I'll go ahead and go into the load I just matched. Here we go. And then go to the Quotes and Invoices tab, and you'll see that the transaction was already created. Again, just avoiding that manual data entry that your users previously had to do. So there it is. You've got your invoice and all of the XML related fields, so origin, destination, cost information, and any carrier due dates and things of those nature. All right, so the EDI 210 enhancement is something that I was personally really excited about because it allows your users to seamlessly get that XML information that was previously just sent via an email and allows them to see it in one LWC and quickly match those invoices to existing loads. Again, just eliminating a lot of the manual data entry that was previously required. All right, Dave, back to you.
Thank you very much, Alyssa, for that. And next, we're going to move on to the next enhancement on the list here, which is support for multiple accepted carrier and vendor quotes on a load, which will be demoed by our very own Liam Purcell. Liam?
Thanks, Dave. In our 7.12 release, we add the ability not only to capture the quotes for the carrier moving the load, but also vendor quotes for third parties that also offer services on a load, like warehousing, lumper services, etc. Let me show you. To begin, I'll show you that in the FQA on our load detail page, we've added a tab to house vendor quotes. Now, I mentioned these quotes represent charges that are inherent on a load but do not relate to the transportation of that freight from point A to point B. So this is not the carrier moving the load. This is a warehouse, a lumper, some of the additional charges that can be incurred but that you want to store and get to use in your margin calculations without affecting the carrier quote on the load. To show you how it works, you can see I have a vendor quote pulled up here. I've just opened my FQA. I've done nothing but search for the vendor service in my system that will allow me to store those charges on the load. Now, to back up a second here, the vendor service that you're seeing works just like the carrier services we have today. I've built a carrier service in my system with a service type of vendor instead of carrier. And this allows it to show up in the search back on the FQA in that load. Now, to show you, I'll click New here. In my vendor service, I'll type in lumper, and I'll find Liam's Lumpers. Now, the quote contact we use to deliver vendor rate confirmations, which is just a simple document just saying those charges we discussed, they've been accepted, and here's confirmation of those charges. The contact comes from the transportation profile for Liam's Lumpers and is simply used on this quote. I'll then jump in and decide which charge this applies to. We'll just use blind shipments here as an example. I'll add my charge, and I will hit accept. And now this quote is stored on the load, again, separate from the carrier quote and the carrier I've booked on this load, but can be used in margin calculations if you're calculating commissions or if you want to look at the margin you're making on a given load. Now, our margin is visualized today in the financial summary, and a couple of things have changed to house these vendor quotes for this feature. Most notably, there's a pick list at the top of the financial summary now, which allows you to toggle back and forth between carrier only, or just the carrier moving the load, and all quotes, which includes the carrier moving the load and any vendor invoices, vendor quotes, or payments depending on the row you're looking at. In addition, we also added a vendor quotes relationship to the carrier removal process. To show you how that works, I'll jump to this other load here, open up the FQA, and you can see here I've got stored rate carrier 1 booked here. They are assigned, this quote's accepted, but I want to remove them from this load and book somebody else, and I may or may not owe them a TONU or a removal charge. So I'll click the X here to remove this carrier. Don't worry about the removal reason here, but I am worried about the removal charge. When I toggle this to yes, you'll notice that the accessorial lookup, which has always been there, is populated with vehicle ordered not used. The charge and the currency, none of that has changed. What has changed is you'll now see a vendor service lookup here. So if I type in the vendor I have booked on this one, again, stored rate, carrier 1, I'm selecting the vendor service that applies to this load. Now also I have the ability to create a brand new vendor service straight from this modal if need be. Super easy to add these to the system and doesn't require a lot of work in the background. I'll also then select my quote contact, my VONU charge, and when I hit remove carrier, not only are we removing this carrier from the load, we're reverting the load statuses, following all the same processes we do today, we're also creating a vendor quote so that we can keep the removal charges separate from the carrier charges if need be. That is, for example, if we're going to end up moving this load with a different carrier and we want to keep those charges separate but on the same load. When I jump back to the Freight Quote Assistant, you'll see here that my stored rate carrier 1 is no longer accepted and has been removed from the quotes list. And in the vendor quotes, I have that vendor quote representing my vehicle ordered not used removal charge included on the load. And as I showed you before, it's now included in the financial summary. When I have all quotes, it's showing me that quoted amount. So as you can see, this new vendor quotes feature gives you the ability to capture more vendors, more service providers on the same load. It's going to improve your margin calculations. It's going to keep all of the charges for a given load in the same place, that Freight Quote Assistant. And it's going to allow you to visualize in the financial summary the margin you're making on the load, not just for the carrier you have to pay to move that freight from point A to point B, but all of the other potential charges that may be incurred along the way. This is going to give you a much more holistic view of the financials for a given load. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Liam. I know a lot of folks are probably excited about that enhancement. It's been on our product roadmap for a while now, so very excited to have delivered that one. Transitioning on now, we're going to move to our next enhancement where we'll be throwing it back to Alyssa, and Alyssa will be walking you through another enhancement that's been top of mind and on our roadmap for a while now, which is support for round-trip loads, wherein you can use the same account more than once on a load as a stop. Alyssa, take it away.
I'm going to demo our new enhancement to allow round-trip loads within the system. So essentially what this allows users to do is create a load that's picking up from, say, Revenova headquarters. It's making up additional pickup and delivery, and then circling back to make the final delivery at Revenova's headquarters. So previously you could do this within the system, but it was a little bit more manual. So this feature allows you to do invoicing, tracking, documentation, and freight plans all within the system seamlessly. Okay, let's take a look. So the first thing I'll show you is building a new round trip load. So I will start with Boston Beans. Make it a nice truckload shipment here. We're gonna pick up at the Boston Beans location. We're going to also pick up at New England Patriots. Actually, New Orleans Saints. Okay. Now we have this new button here that allows you to add a pickup and add a delivery location. So I'm going to go ahead and select add a delivery. I'm going to add a delivery stop, say in Revenova. Add a expected date. And then again, to complete the round trip load, I'll go ahead and have it delivering the final freight back at Boston Beans. So I will add the appropriate line items for each of the pickup and delivery stops. Do some more parts here. Oops. There we go. Okay. So that really is as simple as it is to build a round trip load within the system. So once this loads, you can see the origin location will be Boston Beans, our various pickup and deliveries on the route, and then again, final delivery back at Boston Beans. Now to take a peek at what the documentation will look like for this feature, if it is a round trip load, we'll make a note right at the top, basically just calling this out so your carriers will know they have to pick up and then deliver at that same location. Last but not least, I built out a freight plan, which this is a customer load that is also picking up at Boston Beans, making another pickup at Chicago Pizza, delivering some of that freight at Revanova, and then finally delivering the rest of the freight at Boston Beans. When you look at the freight plan viewer, you can see that the load properly shows all of these different stops and that it is a round trip. When I put this on a carrier load and open up that carrier load, again, this is going to correctly show the origin location of Boston Beans and then also show a delivery location of Boston Beans so your carrier knows that it's going to have to make a pickup and a delivery. So that really is as simple as it is to build a round trip load within the system. We fully support this with all of our partners that enable round trip loads within their integrations. So for example, our tracking providers, as well as some of our like HubTran, for example, so our invoicing partners. This will be fully supported, and we hope to continue to build that out as more and more partners enable this type of feature.
Thank you, Alyssa. Very exciting that we can now do round trip loads. I know a lot of folks have asked for that, so very excited to have delivered that to you guys. And now the last enhancement that we're going to be demoing today, and last but certainly not least, is our remove carrier enhancements. And for that, our product manager, David Lazar, is going to take it. David?
Thanks, Dave. This new feature gives our users a bit more flexibility in their day-to-day communication with their service partners. So let's take a look. Okay, so let's go ahead and test out this feature. It is somewhat of a quick one, but we are going to go ahead and remove this carrier. And as you see on the modal that pops up here in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little toggle to either send the email or not send the email. In this case, we are going to remove this carrier and not send any sort of message to the partner. And now you can see that the carrier has been removed without any sort of email being sent over to the partner. And reason why we did this was just giving our customers the ability to take power and control over their day-to-day operations and engage with their carriers in the manner in which they prefer. And so, you know, maybe some of these customers are, canceling this load over the phone and they didn't want to be redundant by sending the message, or maybe they're switching up to a different PO number and they didn't want to confuse the carrier by thinking that they're removed from the load, but they're just putting them on to a different load number. And so, again, just a simple function that gives our customers the power to engage with their carriers in the manner that works best for them. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks, David, for that final demo of the session that we have for you today. But before we do wrap up and move to the Q&A, I did want to share one last slide of some additional other enhancements that we have. So the first enhancement that I wanted to call out was a brand new integration that we have with WWEX, which is an LTL aggregation API. So you could think of this API as similar to the Project 44s or SMC3s of the world, which will enable your LTL business for quoting, tendering, and tracking. The second enhancement is one that I'm sure is fun for a number of folks, which is some performance tuning that we've done related to the tender email LWC pop-up. So we had several requests that we've heard and listened to, and so we made several performance tuning enhancements to speed up the loading of that page, and we're excited to get that into your hands. The third one on the list here is another one that we had several customers reach out and ask for slight adjustments to this widget, which I think will really speed up the load entry process. And that enhancement is related to a simple field, but one that does have a pretty significant impact on the functionality of the new load entry widget. And that field, of course, is the country field when you're trying to find and search for your customer accounts. So what we've done for that enhancement is we've enabled the admin to set a default value and to default where you want the actual location of the field to be, whether it should be at the start of the new load entry process or the end, depending on what your user preference is. The fourth enhancement that we have on the list here is requiring carrier removal before reassigning/tendering a load. So what we've added is if a user attempts to go into a load and assign a load to a different carrier that is already assigned to a carrier, the system will prevent you from doing that and will require you to remove the original carrier before proceeding further. The fifth enhancement on the list is support for larger CSV file uploads of rate entries and better error handling. So in the past, the rate entry upload file had been somewhat limited in the size that could be used, and we had several customers that had asked for an increase to that size. And so we, similar to other performance enhancement tuning that we've done, we've enabled the tool to allow for a larger upload. And furthermore, if there are issues with that upload, we've added increased and better error handling. Next on the list, we have several processes that have been transitioned from Apex Batch to platform events for increased performance. So we've mentioned this before, and platform events are a newer Salesforce technology that's built to scale. So transitioning off of Apex Batch and onto platform events really goes after the performance enhancements that tend to be a theme in a lot of the things that we do. So we transitioned several more of those Apex Batch processes off to platform events, and we'll continue to do so until batch processing has been sunset. And then the last item on the list, a relatively small one, but with a pretty big impact if you do have this type of freight, and that enhancement is a UI enhancement to support multiple limited access accessorial types on load creation. So with all of that said, that covers the demos and the overview of everything that we'll be covering today. And so with that, we'll move on to the Q&A. Got a handful of questions here, so I think we'll probably just walk through them in the order that they came in. We do have about 30 minutes left on the webinar here, so I think plenty of time to get through all of these. As we go, if something comes to you as we answer these questions, feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and we'll answer them here. So without further ado, we'll jump into the first one. So the first question is related to, or I say the first two are related to the document LWC, the document LWC. So the first question is the document LWC available on external facing portals? So the short, quick answer to that is no. And the reason for that is the LWC was originally intended as more of an internal tool, really kind of a replacement tool for the document generation pages that we had in previous versions of Revenova. But it is an interesting idea and certainly something that I think that we could expose in the future in your customer and carrier portals and probably more targeted document generation. So I would encourage you to submit a CR for that. I think that's a great idea and certainly something that we can consider in the future. Okay, the second question on the list that we have here today, how will the new document LWC work for orgs using Xfiles Pro for document archival? So for those that don't know, Xfiles Pro is just another tool that can be used on the Salesforce platform that's used for archiving documents in order to save on storage space for files. The way that the document LWC works is no different than the way that the old tool worked, insofar as the documents that you can generate and use are the ones that are generated out of the system. So there really isn't any relationship with any of the archived documents. You wouldn't be referencing those using that widget. The document LWC is more so for generating documents or seeing documents that are already uploaded to the files table on the objects in question. Okay, question number 3. So this one I think we kind of expected, which is can the vendor quotes tab of the FQA be hidden? So short answer is no, although I think that's something that we could certainly add in the future, and it's a relatively simple add with the feature flag. Unfortunately, no, it cannot be hidden at this time, but hopefully that's not too much of a burden, and like I said, certainly something that can be adjusted in the future. Okay, fourth question here. Are vendor quotes included in the allocation of stored on a carrier load in a freight plan? And you know, there's actually a handful of questions here related to the new vendor quotes feature and margin calculation. And being that Liam is our resident expert when it comes to the new vendor quotes feature, I might turn it over to him. So, first question, Liam, in the context of carrier loads and freight plans and vendor quotes associated with those carrier loads, how does the allocation work for those instances?
Yeah, great question. That one, I believe, is the vendor quotes on those carrier loads are not included in the cost allocation for the transportation costs in a freight plan, but I will say there may be some possibility to allocate them in other ways, so I will get back to you on that one. I'll chase down that question and follow up.
Beautiful, thank you, Liam. And like I said, we got a few more here for you, so you can stay off mute. The next question is on the vendor quote, does that margin calculation carry into the reporting fields for the load? So kind of consolidating a few of these questions here, we did in previous releases have fields like the carrier quote total, vendor quote total, carrier vendor invoice total. So all of the old existing roll-up fields, how are those impacted with this new vendor quote feature?
Yeah, there are now roll-up fields to accommodate the vendor quotes change. And you may be familiar with the fact that we sort of have the three levels of charges on the load. There's the quoted, invoiced, and paid amounts. At each of those levels, you'll see that we now have a margin field that considers only the transportation charges, so only the carrier quote on the load, and then a separate margin field that considers all charges, whether vendor or carrier. And then we do have totals to sum quoted, paid, and invoiced at the carrier and all charges levels. So all that to say, if I could put it as simply as possible, quoted, invoiced, and paid will have carrier quotes and vendor quotes both as options.
Beautiful, thank you, Liam. Moving on to the next question. Is there functionality to automatically create a vendor carrier service for each carrier in the system, either as a batch or as an admin config option? Very interesting question. I believe the answer is no, and I think Liam, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. So the short answer is no, that isn't a feature, but I think probably something that could be done relatively straightforward via either a custom job or custom trigger. Certainly something we can do in the package in a future release as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll add that we, as you saw in the webinar, there is a quick plus button on the carrier removal process to add a vendor service. And when we do press that plus button, we default all the field values to what we think are the most likely defaults that should be placed in there. So really it's about 2 clicks and maybe 3 seconds to just quickly add a new one in the carrier removal process. And that I think is really the only time that the vast majority of your carriers will need a vendor service. So they should get added over time operationally, but I agree with Dave, definitely something we can look at in terms of mass adding those records in the future.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Liam. And I would probably even say, or I would suggest that kind of your approach, the kind of as needed basis, is probably more appropriate. Otherwise, you're kind of creating records unnecessarily in the system. So a good call out about the plus button, and I forgot that button myself, which is it's kind of a quick way to quickly get those records into the system at the time that you need them. So I think probably a better option than doing just a kind of a blind batch upload. So good deal, thank you. Okay, next question. What is the best setup if you are building a load with a pick at stop 1, a delivery, and a pick at stop 2, and then a delivery at stop 3? So the way that you would build that is actually you would split that out into 4 stops. So stop number 1 would be your pickup, and then stop number 2 would be your delivery, and then stop number 3 would be the pickup with the same location. So it's really it is built as a 4-stop load, but stops 2 and 3 would be at the same location, and so that's part of the functionality that we built out is such that you can do that and use that same account location on the load twice. Next question is related to the Apex batch to platform events transition. And so the question is, what processes are in scope? Admittedly, I can't recall off the top of my head all of the new ones, but all of the ones that are available are visible on the TMS admin configuration page. So if you are curious, and I see who asked the question, we can give you some more detail there. Specifically, the question was about if EDI was included in that. I believe there already are 2 or 3 EDI transactions that are on the platform event bus. The inbound 204s, which I think is probably the most high volume transaction, that one is not transitioned to platform events yet. And in fact, we're looking into some of their options to move away from batch processing in that regard as well. So a lot more to come, specifically with EDI and performance enhancements, but also generally the transition to platform events will continue. Okay, next question here. Am I correct to assume that a carrier with a vendor service record doesn't need to be approved as a carrier on the TP record in order to use them as a vendor quote record? Liam, I'll let you take that one.
You are correct. The vendor quotes are most likely not going to be carriers, although again, carrier removal does get involved there. But when you're creating a vendor quote manually in the freight quote assistant, you are likely not going to be choosing carriers that have onboarding platforms involved. It's going to be a lumper company or one of those others, so they do not have to be approved in the carrier review status in order to be added as a quote.
Beautiful, thank you. Next one, the reason I'm going to read this one, even though it's a duplicate, is I have a couple more bits of commentary, which is the question is it possible to hide the vendor tab in the carrier quote on the FQA? So again, the short answer to that question is no. You won't be able to hide it. But what I will say is the Revenova product team, all of the folks that you're seeing here on the screen today, over the past handful of releases, we've kind of recognized that we've started to introduce more and more complex UI and functionality that maybe not be as relevant to everybody's business use cases. And so kind of moving forward, and it's kind of started mid this year, for each of the new features that we're designing, speccing, and building, we've taken a larger focus on defining feature flags such that in the future, when we do have these types of enhancements that do cause some kind of change to the UI or an addition of a feature that might not be relevant to the masses, we are going to be placing more emphasis on setting feature flags, meaning you'll be able to turn things on and off should you not need them. And in fact, I think ultimately the goal would be to have feature flags for all of the items that could, I guess we'd call it negatively impact your business. Let's say you want to be on the latest version of Revenova at all times, and that's kind of the goal. Like I said, what we're going to be focusing on, particularly moving forward now, is the ability to have feature flags such that you don't get impacted negatively by these new features. So just wanted to kind of offer that up and let you guys know that we do recognize that some of these enhancements can have some level of impact, even though it's perhaps might seem trivial to us. We do recognize that and are placing a higher emphasis on that moving forward. Next question here, Liam, I feel bad. I keep coming back to the well. Are vendor quotes stored on a new Salesforce object, or are they stored in the carrier quotes object?
Very good question, and it is the existing carrier quotes object. just with a different face.
All right, very good. And then next one also related to vendor quotes. With the addition of multiple vendor quotes on a load, will all quotes be sent to the payment processors, for example, TriumphPay, Audit, HubTran?
Yeah, so the vendor quotes are going to create vendor invoices, which are the same object, same record that is created by carrier quotes. And without going too much into the data model, basically, really the only change related to vendor quotes is at the quote level, but from invoice and on, the process will be very similar. So they will create vendor invoices, and those can be sent along in those same processes. But I will mention that, as some of you know, there is a little bit more conversation to be had with TriumphPay as it relates to the settlement of multiple invoices on the same load. So stay tuned on that one, because unrelated to vendor quotes, but certainly pertinent to this discussion, are a few things that we're working on in that integration. So a little bit different.
Thank you, Liam. Next one, also vendor related. Do we have to update our carrier profiles to include a vendor TMS type? I believe the answer is no, but Liam, I'll let you answer that definitively.
You're right, Dave.
Okay.
Yep, you're right, Dave. You don't have to have your TMS type be vendor, but we added a TMS type for vendor because now you might have a transportation profile and account that you couldn't reasonably call a carrier ground or a carrier air or a terminal. They are simply a vendor. So it's there as an option, but not required in order to appear in the freight quote assistant.
And of course, and I, correct me if I'm wrong here, Liam, but really that search is on the vendor service record, AKA the carrier service record, correct?
Exactly right.
Right, so basically, regardless, I guess, of the TMS type on the account, what really matters is the existence of those carrier services that are essentially now what we're calling vendor services. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I lost my place on the list here. This is just, I think, some interesting questions. Is that whiskey and Bruce's coffee mug? We'll leave that one be for now. Let's see. Okay, another one asking the same question around the audit process that we just touched on. So we'll skip over that. Okay, next question. We have a ton of reports using the old calculation fields. I'm assuming that's kind of in regards to the new summary fields on the load level. Will those reports need to be rebuilt? Short answer is unfortunately yes. So, some of the fields, well, actually, Liam, I kind of want you to keep me honest here. We repurposed, the set of existing fields and then added additional fields. So, the reports that you have today will still be relevant, but I think there will be additional fields that you might want to add. Liam, why don't you try to explain what I just tried?
Yeah, I think that was well said, Dave. I think what you're going to see is that the existing fields that you have are still in existence. We didn't get rid of the existing totals field. What you'll want to pay close attention to is that those existing fields now capture all of the quotes on the load. And if you want to isolate the transportation cost, you simply need to change the field for the corresponding value that says carrier only. And that all comes down to how you track margins, and we know that'll be different for each customer. So the flexibility is there, but you, I think, hit it on the head, Dave. The existing fields are there. That shouldn't break any of your reports. It'll just be something to consider in terms of what's relevant to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Liam. And it looks like we only got perhaps one more question. Question is, from the carrier sales side, we find that there are 3 different areas to enter the pieces of information we receive from carriers upon booking a load. The antenna for MacroPoint, the snapshot for driver name and phone, and additional shipment details where we put the ETA. is there any talk of consolidating that info into one spot? So I think the short answer is, the consolidation of data can absolutely occur in the system wherever you want it to occur. The different areas that we have that you can enter that information is, we kind of took it as a functional approach, wherein not every carrier salesperson is entering XYZ information. They're only responsible for a certain portion of it. So the layouts and where the data lives today is kind of what you would call maybe a baseline or a template. But as I'm sure many of you know, that the Salesforce platform itself is very flexible, and the page layouts are just one example of hundreds, that you have tons of flexibility when it comes to moving fields around, consolidating, creating new, what they call lightning actions, I believe is the name of the term. So you can put any number of widgets or fields in any number of places that you would like, and that's really just a simple system admin configuration item. So if that's something that you need help with, certainly feel free to reach out to the Revenova help desk, and they can walk you through that activity. But again, certainly doable, and should be doable today, in fact. Okay. Well, it looks like we had another question just pop in. Can a vendor quote be present on a customer load in a freight plan? It's another interesting question. Liam, any idea?
I don't see why not. As long as you have the carrier side of the FQA on the customer load in the freight plan, I don't see why it couldn't be added. But I'm sure if there's a specific use case you want to drill in on with these vendor quotes, I'm happy to talk through that one with you and see if it's the right fit. I think there are a whole realm of possibilities with this new vendor quotes object. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to solve a lot of those problems, but whether it is the right one for some of these freight plan scenarios is definitely worth discussing.
All right, sounds good. And then kind of another repeat question just around the TriumphPay HubTran functionality. And Liam, again, just to reiterate that the new vendor quotes functionality, those quotes and that information does not get sent to TriumphPay HubTran with that integration. It's really the carrier's information, their quote information that would be sent to HubTran, correct?
Yeah, so the invoices all will, you're exactly right, Dave. Long story short, the focus should remain on the carrier as it relates to the HubTran integration today. Like I said, we are working with HubTran as we speak to handle multiple invoices on the same load. And that will be what enables this vendor quotes feature to work seamlessly with HubTran. And as I alluded to in my last answer, we're not quite there yet, but again, had this conversation with a handful of you out there. We're working hard on that with the folks over there. So we are well aware that that is something people want to be doing.
Right. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think there are kind of several features that we introduce in kind of two-step dances where it's, first we put the Revenova, data structure and model in place to be able to support such and such a request. And then inevitably we think of other ways to leverage the new data model with the different integration partners that we have. So that will certainly be one I think that I think everybody's excited about. So definitely one that we'll continue to work through. Okay, so that is all of the questions that we had. So I think before we wrap up, just a couple final housekeeping items. The first being, as I mentioned, this webinar was recorded. We will be uploading it. It should be, I believe, available roughly within the next 24 hours. So certainly feel free to take a look at that and share that with your coworkers if they missed the webinar here. And then I think the very last thing that I'll say, just another shameless plug, we do appreciate when our customers submit Revenova reviews on the various websites like Gartner and the App Exchange and G2. I think our marketing guy put something in the chat there. You'd be mad at me if I didn't mention it. So if you do have the time, we really would appreciate a nice 5-star review from your Revenova product team. But very excited to have this 712 release out and released to you guys now. And like I said, the last thing I'll mention is on July 9th, we have the 712 Fleet webinar. So that's coming up in a couple or 2 or 3 weeks here. So as I mentioned, if you have interest in that, that will be happening in a few weeks, and we'll talk to you all then. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.